Hi, SUA families. My name is Nick Reilly. I'm a partner and advisor at Constellation Wealth Advisors here in Cincinnati. I have a wife that graduated SUA in 1995 and a daughter who is a sophomore there now. The fine folks at St. Ursula asked me to jump on a video conference to talk a little bit about a family's financial circumstance during these unprecedented times that we're in. And so I'm going to jump right in with three major themes for this short video. The first of which is budgeting, the second is investments, and the third is communicating with your family. As it relates to budgeting, if your family's anything like mine here in the near term in quarantine, I've noticed that our spending habits are down. Most of that is probably related to travel and discretionary entertainment. But one point of interest that I had was I spent the time to see, hey, what's the difference between how I spend now and how I was spending pre-COVID-19, and figuring out what truly was discretionary and what maybe could be steered a little better to future savings for either retirement or our children's education. So spending the time on that aspect of the budget has been important. The second thing to think about is interest rates are now as low as they've ever been once again. And mortgage rates are as low as they've ever been once again. So if you haven't refinanced your mortgage in a number of years, I know that the last I looked, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate was as low as 3.5%. I would encourage you to maybe do some analysis around that. Same would go as it relates to other banking type relationships, checking and savings accounts. I know that since interest rates are so low, getting any interest, particularly on checking accounts, is virtually nil. And so, taking a moment or two to analyze what other things you would have at your availability to gather higher interest on your cash balances, I'd encourage you to think through that a little bit. And then lastly, as it relates to budgeting, I do think that everyone in times like this needs to have an emergency fund. In our practice, we talk a lot about our needs portfolios, which is really code for how much liquidity does anybody have for the short or intermediate term. Everyone is different. It could be having a necessary liquidity for an emergency like an illness or a job loss for 3 months. It could be 6 months. It could be 2 years. That's predicated on how you feel about it. But making sure that you've got a sturdy emergency fund is always a really good idea. I want to talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts as it relates to investments. Per the do's, certainly look at your current risk posture, meaning your asset allocation. Are you comfortable with how you're positioned in your composition between stocks and maybe real estate and bonds? And if you are not, to reassess where you should be, and also to think about how you should rebalance the portfolio now that stocks are considerably lower than they were at their all-time highs. If you've saved money on an after-tax basis, meaning not in a qualified retirement account, I would certainly encourage you to look at all of your individual positions to see if you have any tax losses. So you do have the opportunity to sell those positions and maybe swap them into other like positions where you can recognize that loss but not be out of the market. And so therefore you can use that loss against future gains or against your income marginally in the future. And then lastly, if you have the capacity, again, in a down market, if you have not maximized your retirement plans or you don't intend to do that this year, it's a good opportunity to think about doing it because you're buying in lower if you were to increase your amount that you defer each year, or thinking about adding money right now to custodial accounts for children or 529 plans would be a really good idea because you get that kind of idea of buying at a lower price. The don'ts, don't act emotionally. No good decision is ever made from an emotional stance. So have a level head about the decisions you make relative to your own portfolio. The old adage of don't try to time the market, but just be time in the market is a good one. I know no famous market timers, so trying to figure out when to be in or out of this current environment is really difficult to do. And I think March and April in particular really exude that, in that we had a major downdraft in March and a major updraft in April. And then lastly, if you can, if at all possible, refrain from borrowing from your retirement funds. Pulling money out of the retirement funds, even though it's available to you to fill some sort of short-term need, it does pull money out of that qualified account, so that if we do get a correction to the better in the market, that you will actually be out of the market during that period of time and won't get that kind of tax-free compounding effect within a 401k or 403b or IRA or something like that. Lastly, take the time to communicate with your family during this period of time. I'm sure you're doing plenty of communicating in quarantine, but I mean really communicate. One thing that it's important to us that we also stress in our practice is talking about your value systems with your kids. Two important things for my wife and I are expressing work ethic and community. And so we've been, the work ethic has been expressed through, we've been in the yard a lot over the course of the last number of weeks. My yard's never looked better. All four of my children have had responsibility about getting the yard in order on these sunny days, and working with the family to achieve a common goal to make it look as great as it does. And then lastly, community. We spent a good amount of money here in the short run thinking about how we should spend while we're not using discretionary dollars. So we've been buying gift cards to certain retailers. We've been buying gift cards to restaurants. We've been ordering takeout. And when we do that, we talk to our children a little bit about why we do that. To support a lot of the mom and pop here locally, so that the cash flow will allow them to see themselves through this tough environment and come out the other side. So, hey, I hope some of these tidbits are helpful to you. Go Bulldogs. I wish you a really happy and healthy rest of your 2020, and all the best. Bye.